listening to Overwatch League Daily, your daily source for Overwatch League news, scores, and more. Here's your host, KickedTripod.
Good morning, Overwatch League fans. This is your Overwatch League daily episode for January 26th, 2018. Today, I'm joined by Jamerson to discuss yesterday's matches, but first, let's go to the scoreboard brought to you by patreon.com/OWL Daily Show. For the first match of the day, we had the Boston Uprising taking on the undefeated London Spitfire. This match went the distance as London couldn't keep up with the Uprising on Temple of Anubis, Ilios, or the tiebreaker map Lijiang Tower. The Spitfire lose their first match in Overwatch League, 3-2. If that wasn't enough excitement, we saw the NYXL go up against the Philadelphia Fusion. This series would also go to all 5 maps. The Fusion would win on Temple of Anubis and Dorado, while NYXL would win on Numbani and Ilios. On Lijiang Tower, NYXL struggled to deal with Shadowburn's Pharah, and the Fusion would take a surprising 3-2 win over NYXL. In a change of pace, we saw the Houston Outlaws take on the Florida Mayhem. Unfortunately, this one wasn't nearly as close as the other two, as the Outlaws would crush the Mayhem 4-0. In fact, Florida only took one objective in the entire series. One bright side of the series for Mayhem fans will be Tvik's overall performance on multiple DPS heroes. Houston extends their win streak to 3. I sat down with Jamerson to discuss yesterday's matches. So let's talk about the Uprising versus the Spitfire. Boston has been kind of knocking on the door, just a few fights, a few maps away from winning and really being considered a real contender for a really great team in the league. And here they walked up, they beat London. How did they take these maps from the Spitfire squad?
Every single map was so incredibly close, even from the onset when we were on Numbani. It came down to that 4-3, 4-4 scoreline, or 5-4 scoreline, I believe, where both teams had to capture point A again. But man, it really did, I want to say, come down to Dream Casper, even though I believe it was Kamsu that got the overall MVP for Boston and for this match. Dream Casper had so many clutch plays. If we look back on maps like Ilios and when they went to that tiebreaker map, his Pharah play just got them positioning on the point so much quicker. They were able to win out the first team fights a lot of the times on every point, and then from there they were able to build up that lead and eventually put on the pressure onto members of the Spitfire. More notably, I think one of the key maps to go to for this victory is the second map when we go to Anubis, and that was a blowout by the side of Boston, where I believe they had 6 minutes left in their time bank after their first attack, and it came off of, really honestly, just a tiny mistake coming out from Spitfire. They were trying to run the Widow on the high ground there, and of course Casper, he started off on the offensive end with the Widowmaker, but he noticed that, hey, there's an Orisa, there's a Widowmaker behind the Orisa, I'm not going to be able to kill her. So he immediately swaps off. And then from there, they go for the full dive. Now, generally what happens is, of course, everyone jumps up onto that high ground and the Widow's able to use her grappling hook defensively and go to the other side high ground. But this time, Casper, again, the key member here, spots out that, hey, he's going to make that change in positioning. He's going to go over to the Zenyatta on the secondary high ground, and I still have my dash, so I'll wait it out. And then from there, it just snowballed. Getting that key map victory got them basically the 2 maps they needed within the series to send it over to another control map where, again, Dream Casper comes back, and his Pharah play was dominant. Again, they had no real answer to it.
So I want to ask you this. I've been hearing some people, some other contributors from the show, have kind of been saying that Dream Casper might just be one of 2 of the best DPS in the West, next to Linkser. Do you think that is that's an accurate statement?
Oh, wholeheartedly. And it's not just the guests that you have coming on to the show. it's been the Korean players themselves are also really applauding his play as a DPS player, as one of the best Western DPS players, putting him up there with Linkster. And this is a guy who's shown promise for a really long time, even since back on his days with Tempo Storm last March and such. There was a reason why he was, kind of stuck in jail. They knew they had a really good commodity in him, and they were trying to hold out for a buyout, I believe is what was going on. He was kind of just stuck in Tempo Storm jail for a while because of his contract.
Sure.
Because he's a really great player, and we get to see almost every single map Dreamcasper's on at least three different heroes throughout this match. I think he was averaging 4, maybe 5 different heroes throughout each map, and he's showing how good he is on both projectile and on hit scan.
How big of a factor do you think it was that we didn't see Prophet for almost the whole first half of this matchup?
It was, I'm trying to remember who started it off. It was Hureg on Numbani along with, why can't I remember this? But
nevertheless, they didn't play Prophet on every map. Do you think that might have had something to do with Boston being able to steal a few?
Not quite. Again, it came down to some very important maps, and Control being the most important one here because it was the tiebreaker, right? And having Control come out twice, not having Hureg in there, I believe, to really try and go for the counterfire play, especially on maps like Ilios and Lijiang, where Fair can play a very important role in not having a counter for that. They try to rely heavily upon either having like a McCree or a 76 to deal with him, but it just simply was not enough. When they did make the swap to Pharah, Casper was just making the other DPS kind of like a null factor, really. So I think at this point it's just Boston really rising to the occasion more than anything else. I don't think having profited more would have made that much of a difference.
Interesting. And I went and I finally found it. Sorry about that. It was Prophet was not in on Temple of Anubis or Ilios. So that's where we saw Hureg instead. Or we saw Birdring and Rascal on Temple of Anubis, and Hureg and Birdring on Ilios. So, okay, last question about this match, then we'll go ahead and talk about NYXL versus Philly. Do you think we've seen Boston really impress? I think impress is the right word, with their play style, not necessarily their results, but with the level of play. Do you think now that we've seen them topple a team like the Spitfire, do you think that this is a real team that could contend in the top 6 and in those playoffs?
I definitely at this point, there was a lot of detractors originally for Boston, even before, their lineup was announced and people knew what was going on during the tryouts and such. And they weren't impressed because they were bringing in a lot of these no-name Koreans, or Koreans that didn't, weren't as established as many of the other Koreans in the league, but they're standout. Let's talk about Striker. If he's not in contention for like one of the greatest tracers in the league, then I don't know what games you're looking at, because this guy is going toe to toe with the best tracers out there at this point. Now, I think the other thing that other people really don't take into account is the amount of work that the support staff for Boston are also putting into this. The fact that I'm so proud of Boston, and particularly of one of their assistant coaches, and Mr. Bleeple, because he was a collegiate player for University of Toronto, who had made top 4 TESPA collegiate last year. And I know the amount of work they put in, like how much tape they watch and everything. And you can tell that Boston were ready for this London Spitfire matchup. The amount of research that they were doing and kind of mind games that they were playing was so prevalent, and you can tell, particularly on Numbani and how they approached it and how they were able to outthink London. it shows how much preparation that they actually put into this. So yeah, they are definitely within the top 6.
Let's talk about the NYXL versus the Fusion. This was another pretty big upset. You saw the Fusion overtake the NYXL 3-2. And man, it was a roller coaster there. But at the end of the day, it really just didn't seem that we really saw NYXL at their best. What went wrong for them in this matchup?
So over the course of the last 2 weeks, you could definitely expect Carpe to go off. You can expect Shadowburn to go off. And what people weren't expecting initially was that X Factor, and that X Factor was Poco, right? For the side of Philadelphia Fusion. Mm-hmm. His Diva bombs were amazing. He had some ridiculous numbers, something along the lines of within the first 4 matches, he had 40, 50 Diva bomb kills, but no one really came anywhere close to that. In this matchup in particular, you'll notice that I don't think he even got like double digits. He might have gotten like 3. I can't quite remember. I was trying to follow it as best I can, but we saw that NYXL was actually putting on a lot of pressure onto Poco, and this matchup in particular was probably the most time he spent as Baby Diva because of the unrelenting pressure onto him. Now, when that happens, when the tank is soaking up all the damage, that means that, for the most part, your DPS are a lot safer. They're not taking the damage. So we got to see Carpe just go godlike. We got to see Shadowburn go godlike on both of his Genji and his Pharah. And I feel like there was a lack of prioritization on the side of NYXL to realize that they were investing too heavily on trying to take out Fraggy and Poco, particularly Poco, and that'll really enable the DPS players of Fusion.
So, what about Pine? Everyone loves to talk about Pine, and so, and naturally so. He's really fun to watch. He's a crowd pleaser. He, dabs better than anyone in the league, sure. But at the end of the day, Pine is still the only player on NYXL who is undefeated in every map that we've seen him play. We didn't see him get played on Lijiang Tower. Do you think that was a big misstep for New York?
That was a giant misstep coming out from NYXL. I'm not entirely too sure why they didn't put him in at all, especially because we got to see once again the Pharah coming out, Shadowburn on it. When we got down to Gardens, he was just completely uncontested as that Pharah. They tried to deal with it. It was very similar to how Spitfire tried to deal with it. Instead of trying to go for that counterplay or they tried to go for like a counter Pharah, they tried to deal with it, I believe, on NYXL side by using a Soldier 76, while Spitfire tried more for a McCree style. It just did not work for them at all, especially when you have someone who's as deadly and as accurate as Shadowburn manning that Pharah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think that, like some of the speculation I'm hearing is maybe they just thought that with Libero and Sabiobi and their hero pools kind of complementing each other a little better, it's a little bit better if they decide that they want to run the Pharah. So, I mean, do you think maybe that was it? They were just looking at hero pools here, or maybe they didn't even get the sub in time? Maybe they just forgot. And,
I'm possibly, I kind of want to say I think Pine might have felt a little unconfident, especially after Ilios, where he wasn't really getting the better of Carpe when they were going for those Widow duels. His McCree did help them win out that map, but it didn't look as dominant of a Pine showing. It wasn't just the Pine show there. Right. Carpe definitely put screws to him. And so he might have just not felt as confident. And yeah, you can run the Libero Sabiobi, but I feel like getting taken to that 5th map just really knocked the winds out of their sails.
Yeah, definitely. Last question I want to ask you is about the Houston versus Florida match. And Houston, I would say to most people's expectations, 4-0'd the Florida Mayhem. And but Florida didn't look awful, I would say, in this one. And one person who really stood out to me in particular was Tvik. We've definitely seen Tvik kind of struggle to return to form since kind of the whole Misfits disbanding, maybe even a little bit before that. But he played quite well. He had quite a few big plays here. Are you seeing Tvik returning to form here? Or you think that this was just overall a strong series for him?
This was definitely a strong showing for him. I think one of the issues with the Mayhem lineup, because it is that core 6, they don't have any subs. They're still trying to figure out their systems. And what's really odd is how frequently, even mid-series, that they swap the DPS roles between Logix and Tvik. Logix and Tvik, they'll swap off on who's going to play the Widowmaker, and sometimes they'll even throw in Zebasai there to be the Widowmaker for them. It's at this stage of the game, you need highly specialized, people who absolutely excel on a specific hero. You need the top of the line all the time, or you are going to lose. Now, Tvik had an amazing series, and he did have some great plays on the Tracer himself. But ultimately, at some point, they need to nail it down who's going to play what, so they can put more practice time into perfecting that craft, into perfecting being a Tracer at this high level. Logix, he was applauded as being one of the best Tracers in the West. And a lot of the Koreans, they were saying that about him during contenders, during World Cup. But he just hasn't been able to show it. And so with this inconsistency in how they play the Tracer, I don't think he's able to really get to that same level that he needs to be. Same thing with Tvik, not being able to play as Genji as often, because sometimes he's on the Widowmaker or sometimes he's on the Tracer. It really does detract from you to have that experience.
My thanks to Jamerson for stopping by on the show today. Make sure to follow him on Twitter at JetSetJamerson. Tomorrow I'm going to be joined by NYXL to discuss today's matches. Speaking of tonight's matches, we have the blockbuster Seoul Dynasty versus NYXL matchup taking place at 4 p.m. Pacific time. Then we've got the Shanghai Dragons taking on the Philadelphia Fusion at 6 p.m. Pacific time. And then we've got the Dallas Fuel taking on the San Francisco Shock at 8 p.m. Pacific time. You can find links to everything for the show at OverwatchLeagueDaily.com and can watch or listen to the show on the front page of WinstonsLab.com. That's going to do it for today. I'll be back tomorrow with NYXL for another episode of Overwatch League Daily.